Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good to see so many of you. I almost accidentally just left the meeting, but it is wonderful to have all of those familiar faces. And it's wonderful to be able to start again together this new year and this new series of Torah readings, beginning again with the beginning. And there's an interpretation, I believe it belongs to Eli Wiesel, who likes to translate the beginning of Bereshit bara Elohim, which is often translated as either in the beginning God created or when God was creating, to say that God creates beginnings. And I love that this is an opportunity for us to have yet another beginning. And so with that, we will enter into our Shabbat service. Welcome.
הנה מה טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. How wonderful it is for us to be together this evening. We continue singing with Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Yadadai, Yadadai, Yadadai. 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 I will build this world from love. Yadadai, 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 yadadai. And you must build this world from love. Yadadai, 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 yadadai. And if we build this world from love, yadadai, 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 then God will build this world from love. Yadadai, 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 yadadai. Ooh, yadadai, 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 And I invite, if you have candles, to join me in the candle blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. We continue together with the words of Shalom Aleichem, which can be found on page 24 if you have your prayer book. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bochem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu ni l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vitkada Shemir Rabba Belma Divrach Yutev Yamlich Malchute Bechai Echon Uf Yom Echon Uf Chayed Kobet Yisrael Bagala Bagala Uvismahan Kariv Vehimru Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabba Mevarach Mehalam Ulal Mehalmaya Yitbarach Yitbarach Vishtabach Yitbahar Vitramam V'yitnaseh V'yithadar V'yithaleh V'yithalal Shemei Dekudesha B'richu Tehila mikol bechata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma, v'himeru, Amen. I'll ask that those who are able to please rise as we join together with the Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam avad.
We continue on page 30. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim, b'chochma poteach she'arim, u'vitfuna meshane itim u'machalif et hazmanim, u'misader et ha'kochavim b'mishmerotehem barakia kirtzono. Bore yom v'layla golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, u'ma'avir yom u'mevi layla, Umavdil ben yom uvein laila, Adonai tziva'ot shemo, El chai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch ata Adonai, hama'ariv aravim. Everlasting love you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael.
Ma Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Leolam Vaed. You may be seated. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום בלבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Adonai Lechem Emet, on page 39. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there, except by joining hands and marching together.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, מלכותך ראו בניך, חוקי הים לפני משה, זה עלינו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך, אדוני ימלוך, לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom, aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim.
ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. מקדשי שבי שבת, כולם יספרו ויתענגו מטובך השבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ובשביעי רצית בו ורצית בו וקידשתו שבת, חמדת ימים, אותו קראת שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג שבת, זכר למעשה בראשית שבת, זכר למעשה בראשית שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. Ask that those who are able to please rise for the tefillah, the Amidah. Adonai sefata tiftach ufi agit ilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol, HaGibor v'Hanorah, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei HaKol, V'zocher Chazei Avot v'Imot, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם וזרעת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, וחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל החיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, תומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו בישני עפר, ויחמוך בעל גבורות, ומינו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיה הכל, אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
You may be seated as we turn to page 55. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu, be'amcha Yisrael, u'tefilatam be'ahavat tekabel, u'tehil ratzon tamid, u'tehil ratzon tamid, avodat Yisrael amecha. Baruch atah Adonai, shehotecha levadecha v'yira navod, shehotecha levadecha v'yira navod.
When we behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars that you set in place, what are we humans mindful of us, we mortals that you take note of us? You made us little less than divine, adorned us with glory and majesty. You gave us dominion over your handiwork, laying the world at our feet. How majestic is your name throughout the earth. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulecha na'eh lehodot. Grant abundant peace to Israel, your people, forever. For you are the sovereign God of all peace. May it be pleasing to you to bless your people Israel in every season and moment with your peace. Blessed are you, Adonai, who blesses your people Israel with peace. Baruch atah Adonai, hamivarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. We'll now take a moment for private meditation. If you have a prayer book in front of you or on the screen with the flip book, you may use those words or words that you find in your own hearts.
Ratzon imrefi ve'yon libi lefanecha Adonai tzuri Adonai tzuri ve'goali ve'goali.
As we turn to this first Torah portion with Bereshit, which again, the translation is often disagreed, but the most commonly accepted is when God started to begin this act of creation. We've got so many different stories within this section, and there's one that I wanted to focus on in particular this week, which I don't know that I've talked about this for a while. And just because I used to always throw a Bruce Springsteen reference out there, I think maybe it's because one of the very first songs I learned of Bruce's was Adam Raised a Cain, and I didn't understand it for the longest time, and so I really wanted to understand that when I got to be old enough. But the story of Cain and Abel is in here, and if we remember, and feel free to raise your hands or get off mute and chime in if you'd like, this is more of a discussion. We learned that there's a problem between the two. One that it suggests is that because they both had given offerings to God, and God accepted one and was looking unfavorably towards the other. And so one brother, does anyone remember which brother kills the other? You can pipe up if you want. All right, Rita. You have to take yourself off mute. That's the real challenge. You're still muted.
There it is. Cain slays Abel.
Right. And so it's our first real sight of someone being punished for something that they're doing. I mean, we've seen this a little bit with Adam and Eve, but it's almost the same situation. And what happens when God approaches Cain and asks, "Where is Abel, your brother?" How does he respond? Anyone? Go ahead.
Am I my brother's keeper?
Am I my brother's keeper? Right. It's an excellent question. And if you read a little bit further on, it gets to a point where the questions are looked into the Midrash. And as you all know, I really love looking at Midrash, and they're fascinating to me. There's a line in there that God says, "The blood of your brother cries out to me." Is anyone familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
And for most of the time, people say this is sort of a witness, right? Your brother's blood is a witness, and I know what you've done, even though you're telling me you've done nothing. Yet Midrashim are actually interpreting it a little bit differently, and I wanted to share with you a couple of those. The first is from Shimon ben Yochai, who says, with regards to your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. He begins with what I think is fascinating. He says, this is a really hard thing to express, impossible to utter just by itself. It's just hard to say. So what could be so difficult to say? He says, it is like, here's a parable, like two athletes standing and wrestling before a king. Had the king wanted to separate them, he could have done so, but the king did not wish to separate them. One overwhelmed his partner and killed him. He cried out as he was dying, "Who will bring my case before the king?" It says, then, thus the voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. And the emphasis on that becomes the voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. What's happening in this parable? Does anyone want to interact? You can take yourselves off mute. This is all about taking responsibility, right? And the question, when we have these wrestlers, we're wrestling before God, and the difficulty is, and again, they say the king, and actually they say that because Shimon ben Yochai was one who had been himself tortured and kept captive, that this must have been a Roman king that they had envisioned. And so this king, for fun, for sport, brought these two out to compete against one another, had the opportunity to say stop, and didn't. And so the parable is essentially saying, and this is why he says, it's really hard for me to say this, because who is he blaming in this situation?
God.
God, right. He's saying, well, God, you could have stopped it, right? Or king, you should have stopped this. You had the capability. It's not my fault, right? And so if we're putting this into the realm of Cain and Abel, what is it that Cain and Abel are saying? Or not Abel, but Abel's blood, I suppose.
Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you protect me?
Yeah, it's calling out against God, essentially. The blood is calling out and accusing God. So I want to look at the next page, or the next little story, which is the following. So Cain begins these excuses, right? He wants to know if he's really the one to blame. He says it may be compared, or this is in Bereshit, this is Rabbah, this is in the Midrash. It may be compared to the prefect who was walking in the middle of the plaza. He came across a person standing over a dead body. Whereupon he said, "Who killed him?" To which the other answered, "That's my question to you. Yet you ask me?" The prefect replied, "Rubbish. You've said nothing." So in this case, what's the divine being doing, if you will, in our parable? He's saying, it's, how dare you throw it back on me? That's nothing. That's rubbish, right? Who's really ultimately responsible when we make bad choices? Is it me, because I have the ability to stop it? Or is it you for making a bad choice? It's a good question. So we look then to Herman Cohen, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with his work, but he is a theologian who's done a lot of this thinking. And he continues this argument. He says, here's another passage from the Agadic literature that imagines this conversation between Cain and God. Cain said to God, am I expected to be my brother's keeper? You are the keeper of all creatures, yet you call me to account for him? Cain's question may be understood by the parable of a thief who stole some vessels during the night and was not caught. The following morning, the gatekeeper did catch him and asks, why did you steal the vessels? The thief replied, I, thief that I am, did not slacken at my trade, but you, your trade is to keep watch at the gate. Why did you slacken in your occupation? Accordingly, Cain's question is in fact a defiant assertion. I slew Abel. It was you who created in me the impulse to do evil, but you are the keeper of all things, yet you let me slay him. It is you who slew him. Had you accepted my offering as you did his, I would not have been jealous of him. Immediately the Holy One countered, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out. And so we have this emphasis of this turning back to God. What is it that's happening? We see over and over that there's a difficulty of who's really to blame. And according to Herman Cohen, his response is, believe it or not, it's not necessarily Cain's fault. Why would it not be Cain's fault? Anyone want to share a thought?
I have this problem with the fact that this is the very first murder.
Yeah.
And does Cain really understand what he is doing?
That's exactly right. That's exactly the point he makes, which is they have not seen what happens with consequences. They don't know what the consequence is of killing someone yet. And so like us, they're born into this state of purity where they learn by what they experience, and they have never experienced anything like this before. And so Herman Cohen's thought is this is sort of, it mirrors what we go through in our own lives and how we are able to learn. So, and I'll read what it says. In this text, Cain attempts to blame God for his own sin. God created the inclination to do evil within him. Therefore, God was ultimately responsible for his brother's murder. Cain does have a point. God created us with an urge to do evil, but the ancient rabbis are not satisfied with that answer. And right now I'm reading from Thinking About God by Rabbi Carrie Tooling. She says, Cain has a point. God created us with an urge to do evil, but the ancient rabbis are not satisfied with that answer. Ignoring Cain's accusation, God asks him directly, what have you done? It is not appropriate to blame God for our sins, the rabbis are saying. Cain had the power of choice, as we all do, and he could have chosen to do good. Cain could have found a way to make peace with his brother and reconcile with God. We see in this a development of morality and understanding through the years and through the different interpretations. It might have been the biblical understanding. They began with the rabbis who were saying at first, who's really to blame? But they all end their question with this, but then God turns it around, or the king turns it around and says, really? It's really your fault. You can argue as well as you want, but ultimately we know that we need to grow and we need to learn. And that's why they say that Cain wasn't killed. Like we normally are taught that, a life for life later on, if you kill someone, you can be put to death. They say he wasn't put to death because he was still learning, that this was the first time that they saw this real consequence. And that's why he continued to live. But I think in a time where we're always talking about taking responsibility and it's the beginning of a new year, as we start to try to change our behavior in new ways and continue to grow, it's important for us to look at the things that are within our control and try not to pass the buck. Try not to push it on to somebody else and tell everyone else if it's their fault, but rather to take ownership for those things that we don't get right, that we've missed the mark on, because none of us is perfect and we will mess up. And hopefully we can learn through our own experiences, if we haven't already, that there are consequences of our behavior. And we are all better off when we take responsibility for those misdeeds. Something to think about. At this time, I'd like for us to think of those in our community who are in need of healing. We think at this time of Charla Davison Gates, Tyler Zeisloft, Bob Archer, Pat Bloom, Ronald Epstein, James Hockman, Robin Kent, Judith Perlman, Rachel Magdalene, Lorna Kundert, Jan Berman, Jerry Butler, Stephanie Noble, Gail Russick, Melinda Glovka, Mike Ammons, Helen Fine, Jeremy Wise, Paul Levine, Ed Bulin, Harvey Olson, Christine Wagner, Tracy Huddleston, Joe McKenna, Ellen Goodrich, Mark Romanowski, Jerry McDonald, Richard Lieberman, Joel Pinsker, Marty Sacker, Laura Holtzinger-Levin, Avraham Ben Avraham Visara, Bob and Gert Kahn, Dave Bussey, Ron Levine, Jay Bainbridge, Chelsea Smith, Shava Eta, Roy Freisler, and Deborah Seidel, and all, of course, that we name now in our hearts. Mishaberach Avotenu v'imotenu, Mishi Yivarech v'irapeh et hacholim. May the one who has kept our ancestors in every generation and brought healing continue to bring peace and wholeness and healing to all who are seeking your healing. Baruch atah Adonai rofei hacholim. Blessed are you, O God, the one who heals. We continue with the words in front of you or on page 62.
Yishebeirach avotenu v'kol habracha imotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Yishebeirach imotenu v'kol habracha l'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. We continue with the words of Aleinu and ask that those who are able to please rise. Aleinu l'shaberach l'adon hakol, לתת קריאה לארצי בראשית, שלא עשנו כגרעי הארצות, ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
Our thoughts turn at this time to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We think of those whom death has recently taken from us. We are in a period of Shloshim for Margaret Robertson, Edith Flyer, and Mary Kaplan. We also are remembering those who have died at this season in years past. Clara Blau, Alonzo Boyd, Leah Budnick, Antoinette Cohn, Joey Cross, Harry B. Cushman, Aaron Daneman, Rosalind R. Einhorn, Rose Freeman, Sadie Goodman, Bill Gronefeld, Evelyn Hallis, Norman Hecht, Minnie Konop, Gertrude H. Kotler, Frank Cuppen, Alice Layden, Louis M. Liebensberger, William N. Leviton, Rosalie M. Levy, Ida M. Moyer, Dorothea Pacernick, I. Alan Peretz, Michael Rosensweet, Abraham Rosenthal, Judah Shadle, Leona Fox Milge, Joseph Yale Tuck, Mildred Weiss, Benjamin Weprin, and William Wolfe. And to this we add all those in our hearts as those who are mourning will rise for the Kaddish. We'd like to rise first, and the rest of us will rise together with you, and Rabbi Sobo will lead us in the Kaddish.
So we turn to page 294. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lalmei almaya, yit barach v'yit tabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit romam v'yit naseh, v'yit adar v'yit ale v'yit halal shemei d'kudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran b'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mrumav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Their memory should always and only be for a blessing, and we turn now to page 5 as we sanctify Shabbat.
Invite all of you who you may sit down if you have not already been seated, but sit down and grab your wine and join me with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu b'shabbat kodsho b'ahava ufratzon hinchilanu zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit. Ki hu yom techila lemikra kodesh zechel tziat Mitzrayim ki vanu v'chata ve'otanu kirasha mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodecha ve'ahava uvratzon Hinchalatanu, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat L'chaim. And as we say our prayers over the challah, thank you, Rabbi Sobo, for playing Vanna White. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam המוציא לחם מן הארץ, בתיאבון. בתיאבון.
My sincere apologies.